last week, we spoke about how smart contracts, computational law, and decentralized arbitration is revolutionizing really simple individual arrangements. Before that, with Alex Tabarrok and a few others, we tackled how dominant assurance contracts are revolutionizing more complex multi-way group arrangements. And today, we discuss how smart contracts can reinvent the default organizations that we usually interact through. After all, they're also just made of contracts. And so I'm super excited to talk about DAOs today. This is the DAO section in the book. I'll share it again here in the chat. But I think, in terms of like the pain points that we have, I think currently many of you who've started companies or other types of organizations know that when starting any new project, you have a ton of laws that constrain you and really a small set of a small menu to choose from, including a classic for-profit, non-profit, and then a few choices in between, but that's really about it. All of these options are kind of confusing, even though there aren't even that many. They solidified in a world that was very different to our current world of before the World Wide Web, and they're often different in different states. And there was a ton of legal compromise that went into this, so they're really not very optimal. And so thanks to smart contracting, people are now really gaining the ability to escape these fixed menus and to design better arrangements that are purposed for their particular aim, and to engage, most importantly, in lots of experiments, right? They're still in an experimental phase. One really interesting experiment enabler here is the Decentralized Autonomous Organization, which we turn to today. And that's really a network native entity with no associated central management and its own asset pool. And smart contracts really make the decisions here of how different stakeholders cooperate with each other. In principle, they're very resistant to interruption and quite immutable. And also because the blockchains usually run with international nodes, they're very resistant to external disruptions. Of course, I think the DAO example that still many of us know best is the failed one instantiation of the DAO, which was a venture capital fund, which came to an untimely end when a user discovered a bug and siphoned a lot of money out of the organization, which led to a hard fork. We'll deal with the legitimacy of the hard fork and everything in future chapters and in future meetings. But for now, it's really important to know that this bug was in the application. It wasn't in the underlying code. So in principle, these decentralized organizations should really be pretty sturdy if well designed. And so today, we're super excited to have 5 really fantastic experiments that are rapidly exploring the space. I think DAOs are particularly garnering interest in all kinds of different governmental arrangements and experiments, and we have selected 5 to show to you today. So we have 5 quick presentations, and then we move to an open discussion. And so thank you all for making time. I couldn't hope for a better, I think, set of people. We have quite a variety of different DAOs, but enough for me, and I'm super excited for the first one. Matan, if you're on here, you're the first one here on my list to present. If you're ready, then I would love for you to make a start with presenting on DAOstack. I will share more info about you in the chat. Super excited that you're able to join. You're more like an ecosystem generator, really, and you're joining now for the second time. And so I think it's setting us up nicely to talk about individual DAO experiments after hearing about your DAO generator.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Alison. Glad to be here. Please let me know if the internet is stable, if you can hear me, because I just got a new provider. If it's not, I moved to another room. So please just raise your hand if you can't hear me or anything. Okay, great. All right, so let me share screen. Yeah. So firstly, just to say, I'll try to wrap it up in 5 minutes, but probably won't cover everything. There's a lot to say. And yeah, I'll just go very brief on everything. One sentence about myself: I've been doing theoretical physics for a bit over a decade. In the past 7 years, I quit the academy and focused full time on launching DAO platforms. And DAOstack was founded 4 years ago. So what you can find on Alchemy. Actually, let me do a different sharing. I can share my desktop, and then I can move between window. It doesn't let me share the desktop. Okay. So let me then show you something else. Okay. So I'll do this.
Desktop sharing is very bold, Matan.
Yeah. I'm not finding the actual window that I want to share somehow. Okay, here it is. Okay, so this is Alchemy. I'll show you like 1 minute about Alchemy. Alchemy is the oldest DAO platform I think you can find. It's 3 years old, and you can find a few DAOs. We are not developing it any further, but it's actually quite cool. Here, for example, you can see a DAO. This is a real DAO. This is DAO, which is managing between $50 to $100 million in treasury, fully on-chain, fully on smart contracts of Alchemy. This is the hot wallet of the DAO, the XDX DAO, where it's running daily payment to sort of like employees of the DAO. And this is an example of a proposal where an employee is asking for payment from a DAO entity. So it's not launched in any jurisdiction. It's fully on-chain entity, and it's managing between $50 and $100 million. I'm just showing you what is like maybe the biggest DAO we can find fully on-chain right now, but it's a very old platform. So I won't dig into it. I'll try to dig into more the newer version of what we're doing right now. So for that, I'll stop sharing and share now another screen. Yeah. So what you could find on Alchemy, you could find it's fully on Ethereum smart contracts. It's pretty sophisticated, actually. It has also pretty sophisticated governance system. It can do anything on the blockchain, but it's quite crappy. It's very old. It's not friendly to use. It's not something you would expect as a regular user. And you can actually find a real DAO managing between $50 and $100 million treasury on smart contracts, fully decentralized. Okay, what is Common about? So Common is a new version that we have been developing for the last year. The idea here is to be much more targeted to the mainstream, enabling the coordination and collaboration of thousands and then millions around any joint interest, purpose, or project. And you may ask, what do you mean by any? So you can imagine thousands of people collaborating to build a decentralized business. You can imagine many thousands running an urban community, large scale collaboration to solve climate, maybe millions of people coordinating to escape Facebook, or even running a virtual state. So let me show you very quickly. I'll show you a demo. For that, I'll need to ask Alice. I need to ask you to accept my mobile, because right now it's fully mobile. Thank you. So I'll do a very quick demo of Common. Again, I won't get into much details because it's what I can do in 5 minutes. Oh, I need host sharing. Can you do host sharing? Can you give me my other account? Yeah, thank you. So, for some reason it doesn't let me do screen sharing. Okay, so I won't be able. Okay, I cannot do screen sharing for some reasons. So I won't do that then. You can download Common. If you just go to common.io, you'll just find it, and you can download the app. You can play with it. What would you find if you did so? You would find simple DAO launch. You can launch a DAO just as easy it would be to launch a Facebook group. You can make a basic rule setup. People can join as members to the DAO by placing a minimum contribution. So when you open a DAO, you set up what is the minimum contribution. It can be a one-time contribution, like $20. It can be a monthly recurring payment, say $10 a month. And then, of course, the DAO should also approve you to become a member. Once you're a member, you can participate in moderated discussions. You can make a proposal to the DAO to allocate funds to projects and actions. Then the DAO would let members vote on those proposals and make a majority decision. You find integration of credit cards and bank accounts, and eventually even right now the pilot is in Israel, but you'll find a fully trustee-based legal framework. Quite advanced legal framework. And the current version is actually not running on the blockchain. And the reason for that is because we found that the previous version ran on the blockchain and the next versions will run on the blockchain, but right now still running on the actual blockchain slows down quite a bit the application when you really want to turn to the mainstream and be mobile native and all that. So right now we are progressing on the backends to allow both perfect UX and being on the blockchain.
When you say the blockchain, which blockchain?
Right. So Alchemy that you've seen is on the Ethereum mainnet. It's actually it's Ethereum, any Ethereum compatible or EVM compatible blockchain. You'd find some DAOs running on Ethereum mainnet, and you'd find some DAOs running on XDAI, if you're familiar with that. And the previous version of Common was running on XDAI as well. But even on XDAI, even with XDAI, it was too not good enough UX to be suitable for the mainstream. Okay, so what if you played? It's really pity that I can't show you that. But if you did play with that, you'd find all the things that I mentioned. What you wouldn't find, and you should expect later this year, and I think with that you could also connect to more of those purposes that I've mentioned over here. So firstly, we'll start seeing many more different decision-making processes and fund allocation processes. For example, just to example, you'll find multiple choice comparison between proposals and more sophisticated budget management processes. It would actually be on the blockchain, but will be in a way which will be scalable, it will be cheap, and will be friendly to use. And that's, of course, if you're familiar with the details, that's relying either on moving to a different blockchain, but we also want to keep it very decentralized, and we like Ethereum because of that. So either moving to a different blockchain or relying on a layer 2 solution, and that's right now what we're working on. We're actually working on our own layer 2 solution, which is specifically suited for DAOs. You'd find, this is all what you already find in Alchemy. You'd find sensible DAO decision in very large number of voters. If you think about this, this is one of the biggest problems for DAOs. This majority decision makes sense when you have 50 people or 100 people, but majority decision doesn't make any sense if you have crowds of 1,000 people, which make also 1,000 proposals, because most people would not even consider or even see most of the proposals. And then the question how a very little attention makes sensible decision, which is also resonating with the majority of the DAO. So we've invented the protocol for that. It's called holographic consensus, and this will be also incorporated in next versions. You'd find more exotic joining rules, for example, conditional pledging like Kickstarter. Imagine a common which is aimed to escape millions of people escaping Facebook. You can pledge a few $100 saying, I'm going to escape Facebook if we reach, let's say 1 million or 10 million members of this common, and you're not risking anything if you're not reaching the destination. But if we do reach the destination, let's say 10 million people pledging $100 to escape Facebook, what you reach with that, once you reach the million, the target, you reach 1 million escapers together with 10 million escapers together with $1 billion budget to just purchase another social media platform or build one to be owned by the users. Just an example of what coordination of 1 million people or 10 million people would allow you to do.
Thank you. Awesome.
Yeah. Okay. Let's end here. Thank you.
Thank you. So I should comment in chat. I can try it out, and we'll get to that in the discussion as well. And I shared your previous Foresight talk as well. And next example up, we have Jazear Brooks. Jazear is a Foresight fellow, and he will be presenting on Sift Chain and their governance protocol. And we have Jazear. I think you should be co-host already. Let me know if you're ready. Okay.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So I whipped up a few slides for everybody. I'm gonna just share my screen, and here we go. All right, you guys can see my screen, right? Perfect. Okay. So these are plans that we actually intend to implement. This has sort of the idea that we need to figure out what our DAO structure is, and you'll see it's a relatively novel DAO structure, became pretty obvious as we thought about long-term commitments to the protocol, both in terms of, say, interest and like moving beyond the standard DEX framework. By the way, Sift Chain is a decentralized exchange framework for those of you who are unaware.
Did you want to go into present mode?
No.
Okay.
Good question, but no, I want to read my notes. And I only have one screen available right now. So the first module is the cultivation and maintenance of wealth generation engines. So we have a DEX right now that has features like margin, options, and so forth. And as you can see from this table here, that is enough in some cases to give you competitive wealth with like certain nations. So Uniswap has 16 billion, which is more than the country to the right. I can't remember these country flag names. Then Bitcoin collectively has more than, I think, some other country. I can't remember which the names of these countries. But the point is, like, just by building a blockchain, you can actually get nation state level wealth. And not only that, but just by building a DEX, you can get nation state level wealth. So like our first goal is to hit this. And I think a lot of other DEXs are trying to do the same. Another project I worked on, Thorchain, is like about at escape velocity for this, but not quite there yet. But my point is it's relatively straightforward to do in comparison to everything else I'm going to describe. The second module is to have the customer base, the users, become a community/society in which blockchain addresses are the primary identifier, replacing social security numbers, and the growth of system income, meaning like income on the chain, is the primary goal. So if you are driving income, like you're trading a lot, you're staking a lot, you're pooling a lot, then we care about that a lot, and we can measure that from your activity on chain. We also would want to get people to link their addresses to Web2 accounts, like Twitter and Facebook. Module 3 is making sure that there are a lot of councils in the DAO that achieve specific goals. Open source coding standards is one, and we want to take cues from like large open source institutions. Being a commons, as I mentioned, the principles for a commons here for just managing community resources. On-chain UBI, which I think is really important, which effectively justifies treating this group as a state, not just an economy, because we have a major social welfare component. Public funding of research. I think there are a lot of great futurist initiatives like life extension and so on that the DAO could fund as well in specific councils. And then a deep communications layer with other DAOs, Syndicate DAO, Karma DAO. There are hundreds of DAOs at this point that are pretty influential, and we want our DAO to have, like, say, ambassadorships to other DAOs. Then for module 4, we want a needs and gives layer. For those of you who are unaware, needs and gives is a specific action in which you get a group of people in a community to write their needs on a post-it note. They then place the post-it note on a wall, and then the community members read that wall, and if they think they can help someone with their need, they offer a give, which is to say they grab the post-it note, say, hey, I can help you with this, and then they coordinate. So this is like a barter economy where for goods and services, and now you can earn reputation as opposed to just earning wealth. Then module 5 is to collect detailed feedback on user goals on like all the key topics above plus more. We can imagine asking thousands of different questions in deep surveys, which you can answer directly or as time comes. Then module, maybe these numbers are off, but module, this should be 6, is that we introduce self-binding commitments to help people achieve the goals that I mentioned from module 5. Module 7 is that people selectively share the answers from their needs and gives list to community members, so that you end up having a situation where people can help you reach your goals. We want to then entice, performance coaches, psychologists, and so on to help people achieve difficult goals. So this is all about building a layer of social trust and social benefit towards arbitrary goals on top of a wealth generation layer. Module 8 is about creating fantasy archetypes or classes that can be achieved based on the goals that you've met from module 5. So like Bard, Mage, or Warrior. And then we want to have semi-personalized storylines generated by paid narrative creators or semi-personalized digital assets created by paid artists. So you could end up basically living in your own game, and this game would be paid for with like your crypto wealth. There is a module 9 that I have here, but I don't have time to explain it. Suffice it to say, Sif here is the branding for Sift Chain. And now you have a little bit more of an understanding as to why.
Wow, very nice, succinct, totally on time. Lots of information there. Thank you, Jazear. Could you please share your slides, if you're okay with that, with people in the group? And same for Matan. If any of the documents that I mentioned about you are not in the chat yet, then please share them. Thank you. Wow, man, so much to unpack. Okay, I can't wait for the panel already. And we're only 2 people in. Okay, next one up, we have Patrick Joyce. Patrick, are you on here? And if so, do you want to unmute yourself?
Hey, how's it going? So my name is Patrick. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer of ResearchHub, which is a Reddit-style forum where academics can share research outputs, anyone can curate, and then there's a public discussion section. The idea of ResearchHub is to try and change the incentive structure of academic science in order to encourage behaviors that actually make the world an easier place to share research within. I have some slides here. I guess let me share my screen and I can show the application first. So here's our homepage. The idea is academic posts are automatically curated based on social media data. So like Twitter, for example. And then authors can come and claim their papers, and you can have a discussion specifically with the author of the scientific paper. The idea here is that we'd like to change the incentive structure of science. Is anyone here familiar with good arts law? Have you heard of this concept before? The idea is when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. So when you're trying to judge the quality of something and you assign like a metric to it, oftentimes people are incentivized to simply maximize the metric rather than maximize the behavior that's trying to be measured in the first place. This is a huge deal in academia because it's really hard to try and decide what good quality research is. And there's a whole lot of money that goes into distributing funding to different researchers. Currently, what happens is funders use something called bibliometrics, which is basically like a citation-based metric in order to distribute funding. So the concept here is if a researcher before has published a lot, has a lot of citations, they'll probably be a safe investment for the next research grant. The issue is that this causes researchers to actually maximize their bibliometrics rather than create good science. So this causes something like the replication crisis, where oftentimes papers, their findings are overstated and then unable to be replicated. It also creates a job market where there's something like 1% of first-year PhD students in the United States end up finding research professorships, and a large majority just end up leaving academia. So what we'd like to do with the ResearchHub DAO is create a governance structure where instead of having academics just be sort of like a victim to this pre-established incentive structure that's been around since like the 1600s, use an ERC20 token and representative democracy in a DAO in order to allow holders of the tokens, ideally academics, to create their own reward structures. So maybe they think like collaborations is the best way to reward a scientist, or maybe it's how many citations you get 30 years down the road. Essentially, what we want to do with the ResearchHub DAO is create the ability for a dynamic incentive structure that changes over time, where we understand that we're creating a behavioral target, and we want to leverage good arts law in order to incentivize specific behaviors towards this target in the future. You can have like a moving target to try and incentivize whatever you want. So that's kind of like the overall goal. We actually have our first DAO vote coming up here in the middle of June, where in order to have proper representation within our DAO of academics, we're going to have an airdrop. So anybody who's published an academic paper in the past can come to ResearchHub, claim the tokens that are associated with their paper, and use those tokens to vote in a DAO in order to update the algorithm over time. That's my presentation. If you have any questions, looking forward to it. Thanks for having me.
Lovely. Thank you so much. I would say we maybe bump the questions to when we have the panel discussion. And next on up, we are moving to Tyler from VitaDAO. Thank you so much. And Tyler, are you here?
I'm here. Thank you so much.
Okay, perfect. I think this is a very nice segue from ResearchHub into VitaDAO. We're getting from science in general as an ecosystem into VitaDAO, taking a very specific angle. And
can you guys see my screen okay?
Yep.
Perfect. So I'll just preface this with a couple of things. So I was vaccinated early this morning and I'm struggling with a bit of like flu-like symptoms. So just bear with me. Yeah, so I'm Tyler. I'm a biochemist by trade with a background in experimental therapeutics and biogerontology. A few years ago, I started to drink the crypto Kool-Aid a bit and started on a journey of really learning about decentralization, co-founded a company called Molecule with Paul Kohlhaas, who's also on the call, that has a general mission of trying to decentralize and modularize drug development. And I'm also one of the co-initiators of VitaDAO, which I'll be talking about today. And I just want to preface this quickly with, we hosted a sort of a discussion AMA with Aubrey de Grey and Vitalik the other day, and Vitalik had this really amazing bit of insight that I think speaks, at least for me, why I sort of got into the space, which is the biggest contribution of crypto to the world is really providing this grounds for active experimentation. You have a lot of people experimenting in a really agile way, and it's the thing that makes me super excited about the space. So VitaDAO is a DAO that's really focused on funding research into human longevity. Its mission is to extend human health and lifespan by researching, financing, and commercializing longevity therapeutics in an open, accessible, and democratic manner where really anyone can join the DAO. The focus is really to attract researchers, postdocs, even enthusiasts, crypto OGs that have a lot of experience in the ecosystem, understand governance structures, and try to bring people together around this common goal of really progressing high risk, high reward longevity therapeutics development. So from an ecosystem perspective, there's a few really interesting components that make this possible. Essentially, members can join the DAO by either contributing funding or also contributing work. So for example, laboratories could get stakes in this, contract research organizations can get stakes in this by contributing preclinical development services or any sort of expertise. The DAO operates on a sort of unique technical and legal framework that we've been developing at Molecule for some time, which is really this ability to attach intellectual property itself to NFTs, which actually allows us to hold real world assets on chain. And I think this is something that is going to have an impact well beyond the actual use case for this DAO and hopefully in a lot of other DAOs and sort of the Web3 space in the future. Basically, members can join the organization. They contribute funds. Researchers can make proposals to the DAO, submit projects. We'll also do open calls at universities. And in exchange for the funding that they receive, researchers basically, or universities, give the intellectual property ownership and the data that results from these projects to VitaDAO, which can then work to commercialize those assets in a sort of decentralized way. They can out-license it to third parties, such as pharmaceutical companies or collaborators. And we're beginning to explore sort of the early days of actually monetizing some of these data sets on places like Ocean Marketplace, for example, which is still very early, but something that we're quite interested in the future. Again, just further into the economics, it's really, there's this exchange of funding for intellectual property, and then the DAO works together to really figure out how this is commercialized, how it's licensed, how it might be co-developed in the future. Why crypto and longevity? So, I mean, I think these are both two, not necessarily iconoclastic, but two areas that really are trying to challenge the status quo. In many ways, they've both been dismissed by sort of the incumbents, if you will, Wall Street, NIH, Wellcome Trust, government. This is changing in the space of both longevity and crypto, but I think these are both seen as really high risk areas, but where there's a ton of innovation happening. And the goal here is really, let's align the most forward-thinking economically with the most forward-thinking scientifically to make the biggest impact. There's a lot of people who are willing to make bigger bets than maybe a government organization, a private institute, or a VC. And that's something that we're really, really excited about. So what's unique about this structure? VitaDAO will, as I mentioned, will own the intellectual property assets that results from the projects that it funds. Members can contribute work or funds to join VitaDAO, and the goal will really be to write tickets to researchers in the range from $50K to about $1 million. The focus is really on early stage, high risk, high reward longevity projects that are focusing on actual therapeutics development. We're also obviously interested in things like diagnostics, biomarkers, but the focus at this stage is sort of this preclinical stage therapeutics development, which is obviously in the context of longevity, quite early. Aging is still not considered a disease, but this is something that's beginning to change, and we want to be able to support those projects for when those changes are made. And the other goal is really to deploy funding relatively quickly, so in 2 to 3 weeks, and also to build a large community of academics and researchers via a global incentive scheme that we've created. From a framework perspective, the DAO's loosely based on Moloch v3 and sort of with this focus on NFTs, but in this case, instead of artworks, this is really intellectual property. And again, Molecule has been pioneering this IP to NFT framework for the past 2 years. From a structural perspective, you have members, working groups, and service providers. Working groups cover all of the sort of different organizational components within the DAO. I think a lot of these are fairly standard within many DAOs, but the most interesting for us is the longevity working group, which is really this sort of crowdsourced peer review, due diligence, and asset evaluation board that's being created. We've already been super impressed by the caliber of people we've managed to attract to this. A lot of professors, people who are maybe also a little bit earlier in their career, postdocs that are joining this sort of working group and are going to help de-risk, evaluate, and help the community essentially make decisions on funding. So when proposals are actually made, the sort of recommendation of these, let's say, advisors in a sense, will be listed on proposals, but ultimately the decision is up to the token holders in the community. And we're going to do this completely via a fair launch using a Gnosis auction. I'm not sure if Morten wants to speak about it quickly. I know we're short on time, but
Sure.
Morten, do you want to introduce the project super quick in like 1 minute?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I can read what's on the screen, which basically describes what's going on. So we have access to a really, really large amount of prescription data linked to health and lifespan in Denmark, because Denmark is very good at registries. And we've identified a number of compounds that affect lifespan. So it was really born out of the idea that maybe some of you that are interested in this field have heard about with metformin and neobarceline's trial for aging. And so we had this amazing gold mine of data. And so we dug into that mine and found a number of compounds that are very promising. And the idea is to test these compounds, their ability to affect aging.
Thanks so much. Yeah, so Morten is the lead researcher on the first project. Really excited to have him on board. These are just a few members of the team. There's about 20 members of the core team now. Yeah, and I'll wrap up with that. I don't want to go too over time here. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I shared with you, for everyone who is interested in more on Morten and more on the longevity aspect, a few links in here. Also, we have a longevity group going. If someone is interested in really joining that which is partly scientists, partly investors, also let me know. Anyway, we'll get to more of that in the discussion. But next one up, we have Esteban. And Esteban is from Decentraland, and I think it requires no further introduction what Decentraland is. I'm still hoping that one day we can do a Foresight after social on Decentraland. Maybe we'll get to it. But for now, we're just here about the governance and this funky town.
All right, thanks, Alison. So yeah, my name is Esteban. I'm a co-founder at Decentraland. I wanted to give you an overview of the project and specifically about how we use DAO to govern the most important aspects of this project. So Decentraland's virtual worlds, similar to Second Life, Habitat, and others. In this sense, I think that we are starting in the opposite direction as Sift Chain. We started with a virtual world, and then we started creating all the pieces that we needed for this. So the idea is to have as little single points of failure as possible. That's what the SPOF means. In general, most games or software have a central entity or company in charge of running the overall state and databases, and it's got the authority to change any economic aspect of it or the source code. So the Decentraland should live on if any single company goes out of business, should be resistant to any one entity trying to change its economic rules. And that's why we decided to start with smart contracts on Ethereum. Most of in Ethereum, basically because at the time it was the only thing available, and actually the first version of the Decentraland was a fork of Bitcoin, and that didn't go very well. Ethereum is a lot easier to use. Most of the state, especially the ownership of the 3D virtual space, what you can put in there is on this blockchain. And the composability of Ethereum also allows for this awesome permissionless innovation where you can interact with other smart contracts and have some meaningful interaction in between different contracts and things that you didn't thought of. We also have a network of servers that distribute the content, assets, scripts, images, sounds, everything required to render the world. a protocol, a peer-to-peer protocol, which allows us to share the positions of every avatar, what emotion are they having, voice chat, interactions with the scripting and with the world. And finally, this sandboxed scripting system that allows the owner of land to describe how the world should interact with the users, similar to how JavaScript relates to the DOM in a web browser. So why did I start Decentraland, or we started Decentraland in early 2015? We had a lot of ideas about what we could use blockchain technology for, but most of this was encumbered by the problems of having oracles injecting real world information into the blockchain. And we really wanted to have a sandbox system with a virtual world so that most of the information was already there digitally and probably cryptographically signed. Second big reason why we started working on this was to try to replicate Satoshi Nakamoto's path to creating a self-sustaining economic software distributed system. Doing some extrapolation, I think that in the future, more and more public companies will start to have their operations transparently published. And I think that's going to simplify a lot of operations, financials, auditing, and things like that. So creating a project with these characteristics gave us a frontline ticket to how many challenges and what kinds of challenges this way of organizing companies will bring about. Last but not least, I've always felt moved by the laws governing the pixels in our screens, the bytes that our CPUs move. And I think that this, well, a big question is what gives someone the right to have your CPU and your GPU render my virtual presence, the sorts of social contracts that develop over time that allows you to waste electricity of someone else to render something that I wanted, maybe an email, maybe an avatar with millions of polygons and things like that. This is a kind of like the most abstract part of Decentraland, but definitely would love to think more about that. For example, in contrast with Second Life or Habitat, there are no super users, no admins. All users are equal in the simulation. But the owner of a plot of land may have some extra rights or, as they control the scripting, but users can always opt to exit that scene if they don't like the code. So this is kind of like how it looks like. This is where you start, some galleries and casino, which is fairly popular right now. That smart contract is probably fair, so you know that the house isn't taking an extra edge of your games. So this is kind of like a map of users moving inside of the center, and we've got about 4,000 users a day, 90,000 individual parcels, and you can see like green areas and blue areas, which are kind of like specific community projects and some rows between them. Cool. So we also have a marketplace, which is one of the most important aspects of our project, because it is what gives the fees to the DAO. I'm going to go over this real quick because it's a lot of data. So land is the NFT token that represents a little plot of land, 16 by 16 meters roughly in the perspective of a first user person. We've also have an ERC20 token that is used to buy things on the marketplace and also vote on the DAO. States, which was one of the first in this permissionless innovation things, allows us to grab a bunch of land tokens together so that it's cheaper in gas costs. We also have, you can have a unique name, which is similar to a name or a domain name in Ethereum, and wearables that allow you to customize your appearance inside of the virtual world. All of these things can be traded on the marketplace, which supports. You can offer something to anyone to buy from you, or you can bid on things that the owner has not offered to sell. And the fees of this marketplace go to DAO. Basically, this is also a set of contracts. We're using Aragon. At the time, I think that DAOstack was the second contender. We were a little bit closer to the team, so we knew that we will get a lot of support there. So we went with Aragon. And this agent, which actually has all the funds and can interact with the rest of the Ethereum community, is controlled by the voting smart contract. And this voting smart contract aggregates voting power. If you have land or if you have mana, you get a certain amount of voting power. It's about 2,000 to 1 relationship between one piece of land and one mana. And with this voting mechanism, we can also add or remove servers from the CDN network and vote on major global constants, such as the fee that we charge on the marketplace, whether it's a day or night inside of the Decentraland, and what are points of interest inside of the world, also what kind of content should be banned outright from most servers. With the DAO, we can also change the critical code underneath the land smart contract, or maybe to allow for some new feature. We can also assign financial resources. All of those fees that came to the DAO, we can redirect them, and we also have a big stash of tokens from before. And finally, yeah, this DAO is earning about 100,000 USD a month, which is somehow pretty. It's about halfway there to cover our monthly running expenses of all the different projects that are doing some core product development in general. So some of the challenges on the DAO is that we're currently striving for participation from users. Creating a new vote is about 400 USD as of last week's Ethereum gas price. Today it's about like 5,000 or something like that. And the incentives to participate are not very aligned because saying yes or no, it's also very costly, in about 100 USD per vote. So it has to be something really important for people to come in and vote. The other thing is that the DAO has limited power versus the developer that actually write code. Most of the aspects of the Decentraland are not governed by the DAO because it's software running on the CPU of the users. So this is a very interesting philosophical challenge. And finally, the actual liberty of the things that you can do with the DAO, like assigning funds or modifying global variables seems pretty limited, but it's also pretty dangerous because maybe the majority of the mana landholders can decide to upgrade the land contract and take away tokens from someone else. And it seems pretty bad, but it may be needed if someone loses their private keys and has a lot of land. I think that there's a negative outcome for the whole community to large portions of the world being abandoned without recourse. So that's why we set it up that way. Cool.
Thank you.
I hope that didn't took too long.
Thank you so much, Esteban. Oh my God, I feel like we are only barely scratching the surface for all of you. thanks a lot for this. Also, the tyranny of the majority is one thing that now came through in Claros and in our last crypto brainstorm. So I think it seems to be something that is just going to be a recurring thing that we'll hopefully tackle in the next months as well, as we speak more about problems in the crypto commerce space. Okay, now I would ask all of our panelists to, if they want to, unmute yourself, make comments. I think we have Mark Miller up with a first comment. And then, if you want to comment on each other's projects, please feel free to do that too. But Mark, the stage is yours. Yeah, pick your comment.
So I'm very excited about these alternative ways of funding scientific research and of pursuing scientific research. I've got two questions about that to just stimulate free-form answers. One comes from Robin Hansen's early writings on prediction markets, where he talks about using prediction markets to fund scientific research, because if you have a new result, then that new result might lead you to predicting a different outcome. So simply subsidizing by putting lots of high bets on conventional wisdom, then somebody who has a leading sense that the conventional wisdom is wrong can make a lot of money by leveraging their research by placing bets against the conventional wisdom. So just wanted to stimulate discussion on that. The other one is we saw a massive failure of governmental science with the absence of human challenge trials for responding to COVID. The ideal would be humans. Can one imagine using DAOs to do credible, large-scale, randomized, controlled human challenge trials that are robust against gaming, so the results are considered legitimate and credible despite resistance and fighting from governments? So those are my two questions.
Is it okay to take a stab at some of this?
Yes, the stage is yours, guys. I will take the back stand and only intervene if it's talking.
Yeah, on the first point, totally agree about prediction markets. I think it's something that's extremely exciting. Also, just this is one of the ways that we're becoming quite interested in let's say, due diligencing projects even, or trying to create incentives for people to sort of source information from the crowd and place really good bets. I think it's still early days, but it's a technology we're super interested to explore. I was actually a little bit more, wanted to comment on the second point, which I think is something that is extremely promising and extremely exciting. I think these organizations are still in their infancy. I think we need to get to the point of really proving, legitimacy, trust, have use cases that actually succeed in a way that makes a statement in the eyes of governments. But one of the barriers, this is something that I've been thinking about for some time, obviously in the context of these DAOs, what is really powerful is the idea of incentivization, right? One of the challenges in the context of things like, let's say, doing a decentralized clinical trial is just the ethical basis of incentivizing someone to participate in a clinical trial. So it is not ethical. It's not, you can't, let's say, you can reimburse somebody for their time for participating in a clinical trial, but you can't incentivize them to the point where they might be motivated, to participate purely on the basis of, let's say, some sort of financial incentive. So what would be really interesting is maybe rethinking the sort of incentive design in that space and try to figure out ways that you could, let's say, foster community, create something meaningful where people want to participate, maybe not on the basis of receiving something like a financial incentive, but rather on being part of a community, wanting to make a change, things like that, which is also something that an area where I think DAOs have the chance to succeed. But absolutely, I think, this is an extremely exciting space for that. And I think even things like biomarkers for aging and physiological biomarkers, tracking data on a cell phone, for example, there's a huge number of things that you could do in a decentralized way that would be really exciting.
I can maybe also comment on the clinical trial. So, my group is running a few clinical trials, and the main thing that you need to run clinical trials is funding. And a place to run it. And then, of course, you have to get ethical approval. And depending on the type of trial, you need different things, right? If you're running a drug trial, then you need a lot more than other types of trials. But there's no, in principle, you can run any clinical trial. I don't think the government will object to any type of clinical trial as long as it's ethically approved and goes through all the, logistics that you need to go through. So, in my opinion,
the failure I was raising was exactly the government's failure to approve human challenge trials. So this would be as opposed to the government's attempt to suppress human challenge trials.
So I think one example of this, which could be kind of cool, is there's a group of scientists called RADVAC, which is a Rapid Deployment Vaccine Collective. It's a couple of people out of Harvard who are trying to make a DIY coronavirus vaccine. It's actually a platform which other vaccines can be used on. And one of the issues is that getting a clinical trial approved for something like this is extremely difficult. Despite this, there's like this biohacker culture where there's actually a lot of people now who are doing self-experimentation on a whole bunch of different kinds of therapies. So this group of like Harvard scientists who are having trouble doing clinical trials actually have data from individuals all across the world who have essentially done DIY vaccines themselves. So I think something where DAOs could be very helpful is to create a decentralized sharing platform for these people to be able to input their data that they've had themselves through their own experimentation that required no input from the government whatsoever. And then in theory, be able to compensate them for doing so. I think you brought up a great point where you have to be very careful with how compensation works in order to make sure that you don't end up biasing any results. But one thing we've talked about within ResearchHub is giving clinical trial participants authorship credit. Because in theory, you need the trial participants in order to study the paper, publish the paper. So being able to reward participants and have their contributions be noted by the community, I think would be pretty powerful. To touch on your first point too, have you ever heard of something called replication markets? This is a DARPA funded project from a couple years ago.
We mentioned them in the book actually.
Oh, cool. Very cool. Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I think prediction markets in general are super exciting. I think it's tough to get the structure right, that they'll need iteration over the next decade or so. But yeah, I absolutely agree. When people put their money where their mouth is, I think there's some cool stuff that comes out of that.
So I just wanted to comment about human challenge trials. I think 2 points that are worth making. The first one is governments are not actually able to, in this case, ban people from conducting certain types of clinical trials. What they can do is say, we're not going to approve something on the basis of this trial. So if a university says we want to run a human challenge trial and their IRB says it's okay, then there's nothing that the government typically would do to stop that. But it doesn't matter. Drug companies aren't willing to spend the $1 billion it costs to run a large-scale vaccine trial if the government has basically said we're not approving this. So that's really the key point. I think there is a very important role for some type of independent registration for things like home brew vaccines where the data can't otherwise be validated. So I do think that there are places that something like this could work, but I don't think that was I don't think this functions as a way to allow challenge trials.
The problem is, as you point out, data validation. How can we actually trust the data that comes out of a random person? This is really, really critical for clinical trials, that we know the data is trustworthy. Otherwise, we can't really trust the trial. So that's a great point.
Blinding via randomization on chain, but it'd be difficult to figure. You'd need to have somebody running the trial. It's just that I think there are things you could do.
Maybe
well,
just one.
I think when
Okay.
Robin was speaking about deliberate exposure, which I posted here in the chat, he was saying, okay, why isn't like a group of young folks doing this voluntarily by isolating in a hotel? And maybe something like a DAO could be used to govern the whole thing, or something even like a dominant assurance contract by which we say, okay, everyone under, let's say, 30 without the pre-existing condition, we go there if enough other people do so too. And here's a way in which we measure our health, and then there's still some external entity maybe that would go and check if that's all up to speed. In the last 2 minutes, I just want to make sure that Esteban, who had a comment in the chat, can maybe open up another bucket in case he wants to.
Oh, yeah, no, I was curious, but this was a lot more interesting. Curious about the NFT and intellectual property system, whether that you developed, whether if it works with like some kind of holding company that will issue like some license if you have cryptographic proof. So I don't know, I imagine you go into a website, you sign something, and you get a certificate that you're the exclusive IP owner or something like that.
Yeah, so that was actually the earliest design for it, and we're working with a leading law firm in the United States and a few legal counsel in Europe, and trying to get this to the point where it could be mediated with a contract that can just be injected into MetaMask. But yeah, the way that you described it there is one potential way that you can solve that problem, albeit it is much more laborious if you want to onboard, let's say, a lot of assets on chain, or do it in a more of a streamlined way. But yeah, that is one potential way to solve the problem. We'll be publishing some work about this in the coming like 3 weeks. I could send you sort of the legal and technical framework if you're interested in reading it.
Interesting. Thanks. Yeah.